Hi everyone, my name's Emma Lilly. I'm an in-house lawyer with 2 years PQE and I work in a business in the Northwest. I'm also the founder of In-House Potter, which is an online legal community which helps aspiring lawyers to understand more about the world of working in-house. It's a pleasure to speak with you today as part of All About Law's Virtual Law Fair. I guess as you're here, you're interested in the in-house world and what an in-house lawyer actually does. And we're definitely going to go into this, but not before we cover the basics on what an in-house lawyer actually is. I'll also share my tips on how to land your first in-house role, whether this is pre or post qualification, and then we'll also touch on the SQE to finish. During my talk, please feel free to submit your questions and I'll answer them either as we go along or at the end. So before we get into it, I'll just tell you a little bit more about me and introduce myself to you. I studied the LLB with foundation year at Staffordshire University, and I also took a gap year in that, so my undergraduate LLB spanned across 5 years. I landed my first in-house role towards the end of my degree, so what would have been the 3rd year for the traditional undergraduate LLB. It was a paralegal role in-house and it covered a variety of tasks, and I soon had no choice but to get stuck in and take on a lot of responsibility. During that role I learnt the fundamentals that are required to work as an in-house lawyer, of which we'll touch upon in this talk. I worked in a team of lawyers and non-lawyers and assisted the business in its UK and European legal advice and issues, and also took on the day-to-day administrative tasks that you would expect of a legal team. I was awarded a training contract at the same business after working as a paralegal for 18 months. I was the first trainee there, so we registered the business with the SRA and also appointed a training principal. And just an interesting fact, I had 6 months time to count off my training contract, which means that you can take into account previous experience in the legal world or legal field and knock that off your period of recognised training, providing it ticks the elements that the SRA require in order for you to do this. So my training contract actually took 18 months instead of what you'd expect to be 2 years. I then went on to study the LPC part-time at University of Law. I did this on the weekends whilst working full-time in the week. It was definitely difficult to juggle the two, especially when you're training at the same time to be a solicitor, but it was definitely worth it because it gave me the exposure that I needed to progress and excel in my career. I hope that provides a helpful background to my journey in law, so let's get into the talk. Now, confusingly, in-house lawyers are often referred to in-house counsel, and it's even more confusing that that term is often used to make reference to a barrister, so just be careful when you hear that terminology. If you hear legal counsel, it tends to mean in-house lawyer working within a business. Many say that you have one client, which may be true. It could be the entity that you're employed by, but most of the time you are instructed by many people across the business, meaning that you'll at least have the impression that you've got more than one client or stakeholder. The word stakeholder is just an interchangeable name for client. Now, in terms of the legal work that you will undertake, I wouldn't necessarily judge a business by its cover and try to predict the legal work that will go into it. Just because the business might specialise in one industry, you're still likely to touch on many different areas of law in that role. The key is not to assume that you're just going to be working in the area of law that's most obvious from the industry that the business is in. I've always been surprised by the type of work that I've had to take on within my roles. Now, in-house you can specialise or you can have a more generalist role. The more common seems to be commercial solicitor, commercial roles, because those kind of encompass lots of different areas of law. Don't just assume that it's only commercial, but that will likely be the bread and butter of your in-house work. If you were to specialise, the business might have a team of specialist lawyers, depending on how many they need, or one individual that works on that particular area of law because it might be of significant importance to them. Just to name some different areas of law that you might work on in-house, Of course, as I've mentioned, you've got commercial, so commercial contracts, which includes reviewing, negotiating and drafting. You have employment law, so it might be in relation to the employees of the business, or it might be a kind of offshoot of the services that the business offers, so you'd have to cover that there. There's also property, so if the business owns land or property in different areas, for example, you'd be likely to be looking at leases and licenses of such land. There's corporate, so every business will need some sort of corporate support because of course you've got the annual mandatory filings that businesses have to go through, and also different corporate tasks depending on the activity of the business or its structure. The overarching point here is that in-house you are likely to be working on a variety of things. Even if that's in a specialist area of law, it will be very hard to predict what will be coming across your desk the next day. So let's talk a little bit about obtaining your first in-house role. In-house training contracts are quite difficult to come across. It's no secret that they are rare. There are businesses out there that advertise them publicly, but naturally they are very competitive roles and they may be difficult to obtain. My number one piece of advice would be if you want to train in-house, so not train in private practice and shift to in-house later, of which we'll touch upon, but if you want to train in-house from the start of your career, then I would obtain a paralegal role first. There are quite often paralegal roles popping up in businesses in-house. The key is to look for those that are local to you, get to know your local businesses, and of course if you're willing to travel a little, then maybe broaden your horizons. But look for those and aim for those and see if you can get a place within the legal department as a paralegal or legal assistant. That way, when a training contract does come up or there is an opening that you can create for yourself, depending on the business needs, hopefully you can walk into that role and be trained by that business. Quite often, businesses might not know that they need a trainee at the time of appointing you. It might just be a case of a natural progression for you, and providing it's in their budget, then why not offer you that opportunity? Another tip would be to look at in-house solicitors and see how they got there, so maybe go on LinkedIn and have a look at their online CVs and try to track their progression through in-house. You can always see where they've trained or how they obtained their training contracts, but most likely in-house I would say a lot of them would have worked within the business before as a junior, paralegal or legal assistant and worked their way up to a training contract. Just a quick point on that, it's important to bear in mind how long it has been since that individual trained in-house because things might have changed a little bit since then. In order to keep track of those paralegal roles in-house that come up, I would set up your notifications on LinkedIn to ensure you get an alert every time one is advertised that suits your criteria. There is a common piece of advice out there, which is to train in private practice first before you consider moving in-house. In-house training contracts are becoming increasingly popular and will hopefully continue to do so in terms of qualifying experience for the SQE. Now, there is no set way of doing things. If you want to train in private practice first, then move in-house, then great, go for that. But if you prefer to train in-house, then don't be discouraged by the advice that's out there that might say, oh, well, maybe you should consider private practice first because things are changing and in-house is becoming a lot more popular from a junior point in your legal career. Just to share a little bit more information on what the training contract may actually be like in-house. Now, naturally this will vary business to business, but what underpins it all is the SRA's requirements. Every period of recognised training must satisfy the elements that the SRA lay down. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do set seats, it just means that you have to cover off everything that the SRA deems a qualified solicitor should know or have experience in. And essentially your training principal will be the person that signs off on that and whether you've reached that requirement. So in-house, your training contract may be a little less structured than what you'd expect of private practice. You might not have set seats, and that's purely down to the nature of the role. You might be looking at a variety of things across the day, which means that you tick those boxes over different periods of time rather than just doing them in set blocks and certain seats within your role. You would also expect to get a bit more exposure of how a business operates and works. This is great if you like to be more business minded and you'd like to have the opportunity to get into the strategy and a real deep dive into those principles that underpin businesses. Of course, after you've satisfied that element of the period of recognised training, you'll also have to make sure your character and suitability tests are passed before you can be admitted to the role. It's important to always be open with your training principal. If you feel that you haven't reached one of those requirements, or if you'd like a little bit more experience in that area, then of course have the conversation and make sure that you're comfortable with that point before you can say that you've satisfied it. An in-house training contract may require a bit more organisation on your part because you might not have a team that looks after lawyers that will do it for you, but it's a great opportunity, like I said, to really get stuck into a business. In terms of opportunities in-house and the career progression, again, this depends on the organisational structure of the business. There may be different levels. For example, in one business, you may have a paralegal, and between that role and general counsel, there may be differing levels of seniority of lawyers, meaning that there are more layers, but more opportunity to climb up that ladder. On the other hand, there might be a business that has a paralegal and a qualified lawyer and then straight up to general counsel. General counsel, I should say, is being the most senior position in-house. So if you have just those three levels, it means that it's a smaller team, so you might get more opportunity, but it may be a little bit harder to make those progressive moves. As well as having a close-knit team in legal, it's very important to make sure that you harbour those internal relationships, because you're going to be seen as an extension of the departments within the business. Rather than a separate department, you will likely be sitting with them, be amongst the work that they're doing. So rather than being just a lawyer, you've kind of got to have your business partner in mind on to the different departments that you will service. I thought it would be helpful to run through the skills that may be required to succeed in an in-house role, and those that you can really carry forward to your career through qualification and beyond. Now, one of the most important skills has got to be organisation. You're going to have to organise your workload and keep on top of things, and likely if you're looking after other people's diaries as well and scheduling meetings, you really need to have your head in that space where you know where everything is up to. If you're assisting on business projects from a legal point of view, you'll also have to keep track of the many different bits of correspondence that you have with the business about it. If you can imagine that a project might stem across months, during those months you'll have lots of chats with people, you may receive lots of different documents, and it's your responsibility to keep on top of those and to make sure you're keeping on track of the projects that might be going on. Also, it is likely that those projects will go back and forth, there'll be different negotiations, and they may change track as they progress, so it's definitely key to make sure everything is filed, dated, and just how you need it so you can refer back to things if necessary. And of course, you'll have to do this whilst managing other matters too and a varied workload, so that filing system will definitely come in useful. In-house, you may be less likely to have an IT system that is tailored specifically to lawyers because the main makeup of the business's employees are not likely to be lawyers. It's therefore up to you to make sure that system works the best for the legal team so that you can really get the most out of it. It's also likely that you'll have to learn how to prioritise your workload depending on risk to the business and any deadlines. As you progress throughout your legal career, you will be expected to keep on top of these, so it's a good habit to get into early on. Another important skill for working in-house is the ability to adapt to different working styles. As I've previously mentioned, there may be a lot more non-lawyers than there are lawyers in a business. Therefore, everyone's working styles are likely to be different to yours, and especially those within your immediate team. As lawyers, we tend to spend a lot of time working independently at our screens and may need periods of quiet time so that we can concentrate and really get stuck into a piece of work. Whereas people that you're working with, the nature of their work may be more operational, means that you may have to adapt to different styles to make sure that you really are helping that particular stakeholder. Part of the skill is also being able to understand what might be important to that individual and prioritising, as I said before, which comes into the organisational skill, if that is the most important thing on your to-do list or whether you need to manage their expectations and explain to them that you might have a piece of work for another stakeholder that might be a competing priority, but there's a certain reason why the business needs that done before. Leading on to this, the next skill is confidence. Now, this is learnt as you go throughout your career, but you've got to be able to speak up because not only do you have to manage people's expectations in terms of the work that you have on and what you'll have time to get around to, but you've also got to be open to suggesting things that might help the legal team or the business processes work much more efficiently. If you have a great idea about, say, a template or the way that a business does something in terms of approvals, you must speak up, because that's really where you will excel in your role. As an in-house lawyer, again, as you progress throughout your career, you'll be expected to suggest these things that make the processes that little bit more efficient. Therefore, it's a good habit again to get into as soon as you start in your career. You've also got to be collaborative. Of course, in your team, there will be differing levels of skill and experience. If a piece of work is best placed with somebody who's worked on that before, or maybe has more time to do something, it's great if you've got that collaborative team ethic, which means you can pass things around and ensure that you have each other's backs when you need to relieve someone of workload, or when you just know that something is best sat with you. It may be that a task requires 2 legal personnel on it, or maybe you just need a little bit of help from an external. Again, that collaboration comes in, because if you can work together to get the best aim for the business, that's got to be the best way to get the task done. And finally, we could go on further with these skills, but I think another key one is being a good listener. People won't explain things in the same way that you would necessarily expect, or the way that you have had them explained throughout your studies. So you really need to tap into what they're actually saying and what they actually need help with to make sure that you've understood the instruction. And of course, don't be afraid to ask questions if you aren't sure what that actually might be. But the key point of this is really listening and getting underneath what the person is really struggling with, and where legal comes in and where you can provide your advice or help them with something next time. So just to recap on those skills, we've spoken about being organised, adaptive, confident, collaborative, and being a good listener. So let's move on to talk a little bit about the day-to-day work of an in-house paralegal or trainee. You are likely to be assisting somebody more senior than you who is a qualified lawyer. They will need you to help with maybe the administrative tasks that they're going through, with some of the more transactional parts of the job that are less strategic, and also maybe with just keeping up with things and keeping on top of filing. There is a lot of paperwork that goes into the legal world, as you probably know. The world is moving towards a more paperless place, but of course there's still going to be filing to be done, whether that's in hard or soft copy, and it will likely be your job to really keep on top of that filing system. You're also likely to be scheduling legal meetings, maybe taking notes and minutes of those, and picking out key bits of advice from externals, or maybe that your senior has given so you can refer to it later on, or also follow up in an email to the stakeholder that's instructed you. As you move on to trainee level, you'll have those elements, as we mentioned, the SRA require before you can be signed off as a qualified solicitor. So it's always going to be referring back to those. But the likelihood is that your role will switch from less of an administrative role, although there will likely be elements of that remain, to more of a forward-thinking and strategic mindset. Now, you won't be expected to set the strategy and you won't be accountable for making sure that your work is always in line with strategic objectives, because you might not be privy to those all the time. But it's definitely something that you can keep in mind as a trainee, because when you're qualified, you will be expected to uphold those for the business. When you're a trainee, the key is to get involved in as many things as possible. It might be scary to sit in a meeting room as being the only legal representative, but it's a great way to learn. People still think that you're training, so they might give you a little bit of slack. But of course, when you're qualified, you'll have been really grateful that you would have gone through and learnt those key skills as a trainee, because you can take them forward into your career. As a trainee in-house, you also may have a little bit more involvement in the legal budget, which is the money that the business allocates to the legal team to spend. Some businesses require niche pieces of legal advice, of which will be outsourced to external lawyers, of which of course costs money. So you might be responsible for keeping track of those and making sure that the legal department stays within its limits. You'll likely be covering many different areas of law in a day, and the key is not to be overwhelmed by this. Now is your chance to really take on board and be a sponge and learn everything that you can, so when you are released out into the qualified world, you'll be armed with all of those bits of information that you'll need. You're unlikely to have billable hours targets and time recording in-house. Some in-house teams may do this to keep track of the service that they're giving to different departments. However, you're not going to be issuing invoices to the business because you're employed by them for the hours that you've spent on that work, which is kind of one of the key differences between in-house and private practice. Please feel free to ask any questions on what it's like to actually work in-house, and I'll do my best to answer those for you. So enough about training in-house. Of course, you can still transition to in-house after you've trained in private practice if that's what you'd like to do later on in your career. This tends to be quite common. People like to train in private practice and get the law firm experience first before they move in-house later, but of course that decision is up to you. If this is something that you'd like to do, I would recommend using the trick that I mentioned earlier, where you have a look at people that have kind of got senior roles in-house now and track how they got there and which law firms they went into. Because if you've got your eye on a certain industry or business, it might be a good idea to tailor your law firm choices to that. So what about the SQE? Now, I won't go into every last bit of detail about the SQE. I thought I'd just touch upon how this might shape the in-house world moving forward. The SQE requires you to have 2 years qualifying work experience with up to 4 employers. This really shakes up the previous training contract because usually one would sit in one business or one law firm to do the whole of their training contract, but this allows you to do it across, like I said, up to 4. Although things are uncertain at the minute because it is due at the earliest September 21, we can try to predict how this is going to have a shake-up on the in-house world. In my personal opinion, I really do think it will help increase the number of in-house opportunities. It allows businesses to take on temporary legal employees to help them with day-to-day tasks that they might have. Although things are uncertain because it's due at the earliest September 21, we can predict the effect of this in-house. Now, in my opinion, I think it will really increase the amount of opportunities that are available in-house. If a business can, appoint a paralegal for a short amount of time to assist them with the tasks that they need, or even a legal assistant, and it ticks those boxes that you need for the SQE qualifying work experience, then it means not only are you helping the business to achieve its aims, but you're also racking up that time that you need for your qualifying work experience under the SQE. One of the main aims of the SRA in bringing in the SQE is flexibility, and I really think it does push that agenda, especially with in-house. So depending on the course structure of the educational providers that will assist you with the exam, of course we don't know much about that at this stage, but it is likely that you'll need a course to pass SQE1 and SQE2, which are the examination sides of the new process. It is likely to allow you to work alongside your studies, therefore again allowing you to work full-time in an in-house business alongside studying for your SQE. So the SQE does seem positive for the in-house world. I hope that a lot more businesses will jump on this and see that they can offer opportunities to those just starting out in their legal career, as well as getting a lot of value from that too. Time will tell with what it brings with in-house, but again I do believe it will open it up a lot more. So that's it from me today. I can hang around for a little while if you do have any more questions. And of course, if you'd like to know more and follow me on my daily journey and also my career in law, you can follow me at InhousePotter on Instagram. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my talk today, and take care.